Racism and xenophobia whipped up by anxieties about immigration. It's so clearly never about the thing it's claiming to be about, because throughout history, it doesn't matter who the mob is scared of. The mob just wants to be scared of something.
We are back for part 2 of our Runaway Nun hoax series with podcaster Sarah Marshall of You're Wrong About and You Are Good, all about the 1836 memoir, The Awful Disclosures of Maria Monk, the hidden secrets of a nun's life in a convent exposed. In our first episode, we went through a strange and brutal tale spun by the narrator, an alleged former nun who escaped a convent-turned-torture chamber full of evil nuns and the murderous, debaucherous priests that controlled them. For this episode, we're going to look at how this massively successful and influential book was debunked, who the true authors were, and why they created this fake yet outrage-provoking text. We will also look at the violent and bizarre anti-Catholic culture of the 1800s, when a wave of Irish and German Catholic immigrants entered the United States, much to the vicious displeasure of many in the Protestant majority. It will become clear that those spitting incendiary rhetoric about various groups of immigrants have always used the same playbook, painting entire cultures of people as criminal and conspiratorial in order to justify extremely harsh treatment based on fabricated evidence. I'm your host, Chelsea Weber-Smith, and this is American Hysteria. Hello, dear listeners. We are back for part 2 of the awful disclosures of Maria Monk, and I am here, of course, with my beautiful co-host today, Sarah Marshall. Welcome back.
Hello, charmed, I'm sure.
I'm sure. So, all right. Today, we are going to take what we heard in part 1. Obviously, go listen to part 1 if you haven't heard it yet. Who is that psycho that goes into a part 2 without listening to a part 1? I feel like we're always like, make sure you listen to part 1 first.
Right? I know. And also, anyone who is listening to part 2 first also is not going to respond positively to being told to listen to part 1. So, like, if you're committed to listening to part 2 all by itself, I can do nothing to stop you. And I hope that it gives you a sense of control to hear that.
Yeah, you know, we have to let people live, I guess. But maybe for that person out there that did not listen to part 1, or to refresh the memories of our audience, Sarah, would you be willing to try to summarize the book that we talked about, The Awful Disclosures of Maria Monk, published in 1836?
Oh, boy. Well, it's about a young woman who becomes a nun in a nunnery that is getting orders from the Pope to smother babies and throw them in a pit, and to have priests make nuns put pins through their cheeks, again on orders from the Vatican. And it's just an orgy of depravity, but not the fun kind.
No, not the fun kind. Yeah, and basically these nuns are being kind of trafficked between priests, and any baby born is thrown into a pit after being baptized. We've got crazy gag torture devices.
Yes, a lot of gagging.
Very dark Catholic imagery happening throughout all the ways that this poor nun, Maria Monk, is allegedly being tortured at this nunnery. Hotel Dieu.
This alleged person, Maria Monk.
Yes, this alleged person, who we will find out is real. Maria Monk is a real person.
Okay, that's a giant twist for me.
But that doesn't mean that she wrote the book. Okay? So thank you for summarizing with me. For this episode, we are going to find out who Maria Monk really was and who really wrote the book, what the real circumstances were, and then kind of the greater cultural context in America that allowed this book to become, to repeat, the second most popular best-selling book in the U.S. prior to the Civil War, after Uncle Tom's Cabin.
That's the most surprising part of the whole story.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't wait.
All right. Here we go. Awful Disclosures comes out after it's waited for, as we mentioned, kind of like a true crime documentary that everyone's seen the trailer for in this Protestant newspaper. So it finally arrives, and despite it being like massively popular with all of its readers who are Protestants, like this is not a book that's asking Catholics to read it. It's a book that even the printer of the book knows to use a different printing press name to hide the fact that he is doing it because there's going to be so much backlash from the Catholic community. So this is strictly a book for anti-Catholic people to read, right?
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, right? So immediately, people in Canada are really mad, right? Because this is a book that is being published in America about Canadian Catholics, essentially.
Right. Which it's interesting that it's not about American Catholics if it's being, but we'll get to that.
But you know what it reminds me of is Michelle Remembers, because that was a Canadian story that was a smash hit in America too, right?
Yeah, and that was published by an American publisher.
Yeah, so it's like there's going to be a lot of similarities to that Satanic Panic memoir that, hopefully most of you are familiar with, but we'll get into that a little bit more as well. So they are not happy, many Catholics in Canada, and they also are upset because this nunnery is also one of the only hospitals in a wide area of this part of Canada near Montreal.
It's interesting that this is like a real place, because I would think that in this type of literature, usually it's like, I must conceal the identity of these people because I'm lying, of course. But I guess in the 1830s, you could be even more brazen. Yeah,
you couldn't fact check very quickly back then.
Lawsuits were probably also slower.
Yeah, much slower, but also pretty common. We're really, we really like to sue here.
Yeah, it's part of our national identity. We're a very litigious people.
Yep, we always have been. So this place, Hotel Dieu, is a nunnery, but also a place that cares for sick people, a hospital, a place that cares for those who...
Ever heard of them?
Ever heard of them? They have this really good reputation because they're a place that cares for victims of natural disasters, floods, fires, and epidemics, as well as particularly like impoverished Irish immigrants. So it is like a place that even Protestants in Canada have good feelings about because they're like, well, they're taking care of the sick.
And now people who most need their services are maybe going to be afraid of getting thrown into the baby pit.
Exactly.
Which you never want as a reputation for a hospital.
No. Baby pit is really low on the list of services you want to see.
Welcome to Baby Pit General.
Of course, at no point does the Awful Disclosures make mention of the fact that this is what this place is most known for, is their...
It would be hard to explain how they have the time to care for patients, what with all of their other extracurriculars in the book.
It's true. And they aren't like... People are mentioned in the book, like in the most vague terms. Like there are people in a hospital and they are taking care of the people, but it's just, again, not fun to read about. So they just inserted more gags.
Right. Which also aren't fun to read about, but we're not the target audience, I guess.
Yeah, apparently, we're not. So at this point, the Canadian press is ready to try to debunk this story because immediately there are so many discrepancies between what people know about this Hotel Dieu and what is described in the book.
Right. Like they've kind of picked like a bad institution to slander.
Yes.
Really. Yeah.
Yeah. It made people really mad. So with that, these sort of debunkings start coming out, and then the debunkings of the debunking start coming out, and there's this back and forth press war.
And the 1830s publishing industry is doing pretty well.
I know. So at this time, there's like a huge sense of like nativism, right? Like people who don't want immigrants to come into the country. There are huge influx of immigrants happening at this time. Hundreds of thousands of Irish and German Catholic immigrants have come in to the country. There's just this strong sense that America's kind of under attack, which we'll get into. So there were a lot of American Protestant nativists who hated Catholic immigrants and really wanted this book to either be true or to be perceived as true to help them toward their goals of, you know, keeping whatever America as a pure Protestant nation, right?
Yeah.
So then we get like book after book, tract after tract, back and forth, trying to back up her claims, trying to, you know, present these reams of evidence, and then others that are debunking and presenting reams of evidence that's all very boring and long and arduous. And like, you know, basically people were either wanting to genuinely push their point of view or their political opinion, or just hop on the bandwagon to try to make money off of this sensation that's going on. It's pretty typical.
Yeah. And very like the Satanic Panic, too, I imagine, where it's like, if you want to believe, then you'll find reasons to believe.
Yes, definitely.
Or you'll find things to see as evidence, even if they're not necessarily exactly evidence.
Yes. So one example of one of these books, just to give you like a sense of what their names are, because I always love the names of old books. So long. This one's by Samuel B. Smith, who is not important in our story whatsoever. I don't know who he is, but it's called Decisive Confirmation of the Awful Disclosures of Maria Monk, Proving Her Residence in the Hotel Dieu Nunnery and the Existence of the Subterranean Passages and Awful Exposure of the Atrocious Plot Formed by Certain Individuals Against the Clergy and Nuns of Lower Canada through the Intervention of Maria Monk.
Well, you know, SEO.
So, you know, that gives you a sense of, I don't know, it just feels like so much of this could be someone writing their weird shit on the internet, right? Like just trying to prove whatever conspiracy theory du jour is happening and coming up with all of this evidence that's really not evidence. It's just other people's fake evidence that then is repeated as evidence and like presented academically because they're like, here are all my footnotes.
It's just this like very flimsy structure built out of sort of half-truths and, you know, misunderstood statistics. Yeah, very familiar. I mean, there is like, I don't know, these days I'm like more heartened than disheartened than by the sameness of people over time, you know, because this is one of our consistent behaviors as a species, you know, is just sort of coming up with evidence for the things we already believe or want to believe.
Right.
And it's, you know, it's not the most logical thing in the world, but it's just what a lot of people do a lot of the time. And I think, I don't know, if I don't hold people to a higher standard than that, myself included, like we all do this in various ways, you know, I think the goal is not to not do it ever, but to realize that it's a human trait and to be aware of it and try not to let it undermine you.
Yeah. And you said this last episode, but, you know, you can kind of predict how people are going to act and hopefully adjust accordingly your methods of countering their mistruths and, you know, potentially dangerous actions. If you just understand how all of this works, because it's the same. It is just the same thing over and over and over again. Okay. So now we're going to leave that. We're going to travel back in time to 1 year before The Awful Disclosures was published. Okay.
Okay. Bloop, 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 bloop.
One random day in 1834, a knock came at the door of Dr. and Mrs. Robertson, who are just like a random doctor in Montreal. When Mrs. Robertson answers the door, two workmen are there with this young woman who, you know, is all disheveled and looks like she's in bad condition. And the men are like, hey, this young woman was like standing at the canal about to jump into the water, like Titanic style. And we asked her what was going on. And she told us that Dr. Robertson was her father, you know, so we brought her here. And Mrs. Robinson was like, go the fuck away. I don't know what any of this is, but I don't want anything to do with it. That's not
smart lady.
Our daughter. Yeah, she just seemed like a no nonsense type of gal. So She just said, do something else and go away. And so they took her down to basically the police station because they didn't know where else to take her. So then Dr. Robertson comes home later.
And the police is really just like a building with a tea kettle and some biscuits in it at that point in time.
Yeah. Yes.
Before even Murdoch.
So he's curious when he gets home, Dr. Robertson, when Mrs. Robertson says what happened with these two men and strange woman. And so he just decides to go down to the jail and talk to this woman and be like, why are you telling people that you're my daughter? I don't know who you are. When he gets there, she tells him, I know you're not my father. Kind of like, I don't even know why I said that. And then she tells him that for the last 4 years, and remember, this is 1 year before the book is published. So basically the year that she would have gotten free of the Black Nunnery. Okay. She says for the last 4 years, she's been chained up in her parents' basement because she experienced temporary insanity. So she's not coming in and saying she's from the convent. She's, saying a completely different story. The doctor checks her wrists for signs of shackle marks, but there's nothing there. And she says, well, my mom always put cloth around the iron to protect me.
Yeah, come on.
Of course. As one does.
With your child that you're imprisoning. I mean, I could go either way on that one, Hey, I don't know. We don't know. But, it's not the story that you would expect to hear from someone who had just escaped from 4 years in a convent. Well, yes.
So Dr. Robertson is like, I know that she's not telling the truth. He could tell that she was kind of rambling on about something that probably wasn't true, but he was the justice of the peace. So he just requested that she be let out, and she was let out and went on her merry way. And Dr. Robertson went on his merry way. Okay.
Nice. All right. The world's her oyster, I hope.
Well,
she joins the long sisterhood of psychologically complicated women with unbelievable backstories who are always fun to spend time with throughout history. The fake Anastasias, Princess Caribou.
Yeah. The sisterhood of the traveling gags. Okay. A year later, news hits that this young woman has written a sensational expose about her frightening time as a nun at Hotel Dieu. And, Dr. Robertson hears about this, and he'll come back into the story later.
Oh, boy.
So right after the book is published, there's another knock at another door, and it is a well-dressed man, and he has arrived at Mrs. Monk's house, Maria's mother's house. Okay? And he tells Maria's mom that Maria has walked out on him and their 5-week-old baby and is asking, is Maria in your house?
Classic Maria, honestly.
Classic fucking Maria. And Mrs. Monk is, like Mrs. Robertson, not interested in whatever this shit is, doesn't want to get wrapped up in it, and obviously has had a lot of issues with her daughter over the years and is just like, no, she's not here. Just leave. And he's like, you don't care about your daughter. And she's like, I don't care that you say I don't care about my daughter. Just leave me alone. And he just gets really mad. He gets enraged at her and just starts telling her that her daughter's been in this horrible Black nunnery, and tells her about all the horrible things that have happened to her, and just starts saying all this bitter, mean stuff about Catholics, and just, gives her the Sparks Note version of awful disclosures. And her mom's just like, dude, that just didn't happen. She was not in that convent, period. She goes on to tell him that Maria had this head injury as a toddler because she jammed a pencil into her ear.
Oh, Maria.
I know. And it broke into her skull.
Yeah.
And her mom said it kind of left her as this uncontrollable child that lived in this wild fantasy world.
Bad sense of balance, I bet, too.
Yeah, I would imagine. Yeah, I'm surprised she didn't totter right over into that lime pit.
Just like in Ready or Not.
Yes. Just like in a House on Haunted Hill with the skeleton in the acid bath.
Yes. My favorite movie.
Yeah. All of this stuff that she said about Maria would be put into a sworn affidavit later because the city of Montreal would start investigating Maria's claims. So all of this is like on the record.
Good for Montreal. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm glad.
This is her testimony, basically. So here's another thing that she said in that affidavit. So next morning, Mr. Hoyt, who we'll talk about is the man that arrived at her door. Next morning, Mr. Hoyt returned and was more pressing than ever in his former solicitations and requested me to say that my daughter had been in the nunnery, that should I say so, it would be better than 100 pounds to me, that I would be protected for life, and that I should leave Montreal, and that I would be better provided for elsewhere. I answered that thousands of pounds would not induce me to perjure myself.
All right. Cool lady.
All right, Mrs. Monk. After that affidavit, Dr. Robertson would tell his story in his own affidavit about what she had said when they met at the jailhouse. She told me that she had been chained in her parents' house for 4 years. You're talking to her mother. It's not adding up. And after that, the investigation kind of continues. More evidence comes out. More people say, well, I knew Maria when she was living in this neighborhood. I knew her when she was living in this village, all throughout the time that she had said that she was in the Black Nunnery and then also in the chained up state.
Right, because it's a very long timeline that she's supposed to be in this nunnery during, which again is reminiscent of Michelle Remembers.
Yes, absolutely. And like Michelle Remembers, you know, family members, people were coming out of the woodwork to say, I knew where she was at that time. Like I had interactions with her for years. This is just patently untrue.
Like this is outside of the realm of ambiguity at this point.
Right. Yeah. There's not really two sides to the reality of this. So all this is happening while at the same time, all of her ardent supporters are countering all of these things that are coming out. And they're like attacking the mom's character in the newspapers and saying she was a terrible mother and that she kicked her out of the house and that she doesn't care about this baby that was born through this like horrible priest ritual. And, you know, the mom is kind of not great. Like we're not like standing Mrs. Monk, but she's just telling the truth, whether or not she was a good mother, right? Yeah. She's just saying, I knew where she was materially. They claimed that the bribe that she was talking about actually either she was confused or was misrepresenting and that it had really come from the Catholic Church, that it was a bribe to keep her quiet and that, you know, she was betraying her daughter for gifts from the Pope. So something her mom does admit was that Maria had a stint in Montreal's Catholic Magdalene Asylum, which was a place for fallen women.
Well, you know, I saw that movie and have never forgotten it or, you know, recovered.
What movie was that?
Yeah, there's a movie in 2002 called The Magdalene Sisters about the Magdalene laundries. And this was about, I think, Irish teenage girls and one in the 60s. But yeah, just, you know, without getting into any kind of ornate, you know, unbelievable, fanciful stuff, just good old fashioned, believable, horrifying, systematic abuse of teenage girls by nuns, basically.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Which we are not arguing doesn't happen.
Oh, yeah. It's, well, I mean, one of the things I often think of is that these, you know, tales of like really elaborate, you know, like bottomless baby pit abuse serve partly to pull focus from, you know, just as devastating abuse situations, but where you don't have this sort of incredibly horror movie-esque public grabbing, you know, satanic panicky quality of like, you know, pulls focus from like cases that are just as bad, but where they're putting the babies in graves, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I think it also bears mentioning that after part 1 came out, a handful of our listeners wrote in to talk about how nuns in Canada around this time, before and after, were guilty of abuses, but of Indigenous peoples who were in residential schools. And, you know, there are some similarities with some of the things that we're talking about. You know, these things are like not completely out of reality, right? We already talked about that. Like, these are not acts that are beyond comprehension.
Well, I hate to compare everything to the Satanic Panic, but it feels like another example of actual genocide being subverted by white people telling tales into stories of these real things, but instead they're happening to white babies. And so we can freak out about our made up thing while ignoring the thing that's really happening for even longer as a result.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So she did have this stint at this asylum for fallen women, another word for sex workers.
Or even, I think, just like, look, I saw a movie once when I was a teenager, and according to that, it was also like you could have fallen, but you could also be like sort of precog judged as being like in danger of falling at some point in the future, which is like, that's just all girls.
An at-risk youth, basically.
Yeah. It's like, well, we're all at risk. So
in this particular context, I think they're specifically talking about sex workers.
Mm-hmm.
And she was a sex worker.
Mm-hmm.
Maria was starting at a young age. I don't know what age that was, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if even sex worker is the right term to use, but she was put into this place, this Catholic asylum, which had this strict regimen to try to fix her from this fallen state, right? And then she did become pregnant while she was there and was then kicked out. But I don't think they knew kind of who the father was in that situation.
Right. But, you know, it lines up with the original narrative again.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. And then, as part of this collection of affidavits, the woman who ran the Magdalene Asylum testified that she had noticed after reading Awful Disclosures that many of the names, including Jane Ray, that were used in the book were other sex workers who were at this asylum at the time.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so much more interesting of a backstory than I ever imagined it would have. I think that I had like conflated this and some other piece of sort of hoax memoir from roughly around this period and thought that the author was just some guy having fun. But yeah, this is so much more, you know, to me revealing of how you get people to pay attention to your actual trauma and that being so consistent between now and then.
Yes, and.
Oh, no.
We'll get to it.
Ah.
Two things can be true at once.
Oh, no, Chelsea.
So there's this part in Awful Disclosures. So we're going to go back to a little section I'm going to read that Maria allegedly wrote. And basically what she's saying is that she is going to create this blueprint of the convent to prove that she is telling the truth. And she says, if the interior of the Black Nunnery, whenever it shall be examined, is materially different from the following description, then I shall claim no confidence of my readers. If it resemble it, they will, I presume, place confidence in some of those declarations, on which I may never be corroborated by true and living witnesses. And this is an important part.
Okay.
I am sensible that great changes may be made in the furniture of the apartments, that new walls may be constructed or old ones removed. And I have been informed that masons have already been employed in the nunnery since I left it.
Okay.
I well know that entire changes cannot be made and that enough must remain to substantiate my description whenever the truth shall be known. So, you know, she's kind of like, here's my description, but like if it's different,
you know, I mean,
they did it.
They've already hired contractors. I mean, don't they can fill in those tunnels below McMartin like lickety split.
And that's exactly the comparison that I think is important here, is that during all of the McMartin preschool satanic ritual abuse hysteria, there were allegedly these tunnels where the children were all being taken, where these satanic rituals were happening underneath this daycare, which sounds just so ridiculous. And, same situation. There were the tunnels underneath where the nuns were imprisoned, where the babies were thrown into a pit. And as it happened with McMartin, people decided, we're going to investigate this, and basically took her up on that challenge that she presented in the book of like, come and see for yourself.
Okay. How does that go?
So the first people to take her up on that are these 6 men, and one of them is a Catholic, but 5 of them are Protestants, and 3 of them are actual Protestant ministers. And this is important, right? Because you need the debunkers not to be the people on the side of the enemy, or people aren't going to believe it, right?
Yeah.
So that's really important that Protestants, and bless their hearts for taking up the mantle of, debunking falsehoods against those that they don't actually like. And that's an important work to do.
Oh, yeah.
They finally get approval from the Mother Superior to go in and look at the blueprints and the actual, physical area of this convent to try to find the tunnels and all of the different things that she claimed would prove her story.
Oh, my God. This is an exciting trip.
They go in, they see everything. It is nothing like she described.
Well, gee.
Couldn't be more different, okay? There are no tunnels, no pit, no cells, no giant locked doors.
Oh, man.
It's just a run-of-the-mill nunnery.
Without even a single dungeon. Who would have thought, I bet she was assuming they would just have, at least one dungeon.
I mean, don't they need just one dungeon if things get out of hand?
Doesn't everyone? Yeah, exactly.
So after that, a Protestant Canadian newspaper sent its editors in, along with reporters, and they again saw the same thing, reached the same conclusion. It was nothing like Maria described. And then another clergyman and newspaper editor named William Stone did yet another very detailed examination of the entire place. He was like, every nook and cranny. I went in every corner. I went in every closet. And there is nothing here at all.
Yep.
But of course, what do we know about conspiracy theorists?
You can always find another theory to excuse any weaknesses that people come up with,
Absolutely. More after this. And now back to the show. And these supporters of Maria Monk, these hardcore anti-Catholics, said, well, as Maria said in her book, quote, interior alterations have been made. That's literally what they were saying. Mm-hmm. These people that were, writing these books trying to debunk the debunkers.
Yeah. And I mean, think about how long it takes to get work done now. Imagine the 1830s.
I know. And so that guy, William Stone, was like, look, all the stonework down there is ancient. There's no new construction. I can tell if something's been constructed in 1100 or if it's been constructed now.
And they're like, no, you can't.
No, you can't. No, you can't. It's like that part in the Blair Witch Project that's so great where they find the footage under a colonial era wall. I think that's so cool.
It's so good. Yeah.
It's not possible. Yeah. So yeah, they're just saying, well, all the evidence has been hidden. Very similar to McMartin, where it's they've just systematically hidden.
You just change the standards of evidence whenever anyone presents evidence that you don't like.
Exactly. So it's there's no blood anywhere because they covered the walls in plastic and there's no, it's just there's always a reason why it's still possible, but it just wasn't possible.
Yeah.
Period. Right. So William Stone also in his book wrote about Maria's claim that while she was there, 75 babies were born and then killed. So he did like a little math. Okay, we love a little math.
Right. Again, as with the satanic panic, it's like, seems like too many babies.
Yeah, seems like too many babies. Oops, all babies.
What's his math here?
All right, so Maria claimed that she had been around while 75 babies were born and then killed. And she had said there were 36 nuns living there while she also lived there. But as he would be able to ascertain when he went there, half of the nuns that were there were older than the age where you would be at all likely to conceive a child, right?
Yeah.
So it meant that about 15 women would have been of childbirthing age, which meant that they would have to be having 2.5 children per year for her claim to make sense. That's twins and a half in a year. Yeah.
Oh, that is a lot. Yeah.
So the editor of the Protestant American Vindicator, Reverend Brownless, he was the one who published the like titillating trailer for this book, right? So he was like a full-blown Maria Monk believer. And to his credit, as all of this stuff started to come out and these affidavits were, filed, he changed his mind. And he was like, you know what?
Oh, I love that.
She's full of shit. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And
you're right. That stonework couldn't have been faked.
Yeah, exactly. He was just like, well, I was wrong. And
Beautiful.
even though he was like an ardent nativist, anti-Catholic guy, so we're not going to give him too much credit, but we should always encourage people to change their minds and state it publicly.
Yeah, even if they're Geraldo.
Even if they're Geraldo. Oh, Geraldo.
Whither go, Geraldo?
Maybe he's the Geraldo of our story.
Yeah, he's the Geraldo.
We needed to have one.
There's always one.
So his rival was another nativist Protestant editor, and he then doubled down.
Oh, boy.
And he created a tract in Maria's defense, and it didn't do very well. He was like, nobody cared. He was boring. So he...
Not enough gags.
Not enough gags. So he was like, okay, I gotta spice this up and I have to basically come up with a way to continue the story. So he invented this other runaway nun who came from Hotel Dieu and named her St. Francis and published a book called The Escape of St. Francis Patrick.
How did that go over? Did people like it?
No, it wasn't very good. But, it did kind of revive the supporters a little bit. It's like things were lagging, but now it's like we've got a second runaway nun. We've got a second wind. Let's go. He then hired this woman to pretend to be this fake woman. So we've got a second fake memoir.
Okay. Yeah, we're getting into J.T. Leroy territory here.
We are. So we've got this woman pretending to be a woman from a memoir. We're mirrors are looking at each other infinitely right now. Yeah. And she just started to, meet people. And pretty soon everyone's like, this woman is a terrible actor. She is bad at this job.
Nice. Should have had more competitive casting for that one. It's kind of an important part.
That's what I'm thinking. I mean,
Although I guess you can recast people more freely before video. You just blaze through them like the secretaries on Murphy Brown.
And what a role. The role of a lifetime. Yeah. Runaway nun, St. Francis Patrick.
It's true.
Women would be lining up. So even though people are like, this seems fake, he's like, well, I'm going to keep trying. And so he arranges this meeting where Maria, the real Maria, and St. Francis, this fake actor, meet again. Okay. So it's supposed to be this reunion where they're crying and hugging and,
I hope they're paying these women to do this.
Well, we'll get into that.
Oh.
Yeah. They're trying really hard to put on this tearful performance. But then they start talking to each other and the actor playing St. Francis is like, just contradicting everything Maria says.
Oh, come on. You got a yes and. I guess improv hasn't been invented yet, but...
Not yet. You have to. And she was not yes-anding. Even when Maria, like, it's like people write about her kind of like trying to lead her, you know, like, well, I think you're remembering it wrong, sister. I think it was, and she'd just be like, no, it was like this.
Oh my God.
So
she's going rogue.
It really backfired.
Yeah.
Because it made Maria seem like a fake as well.
Man.
Because it was so clear that this other person was a fake.
Yeah.
And so she's really starting to lose credibility, and people are turning on her, or at least, you know, prominent people. Like, I think, because it's so hard because like the book continued to be really popular. So it's not like the entire public turned on this story,
right.
But, you know, the people around her were no longer egging this on.
Right.
Right.
She's stopped being convenient as a cause celeb, maybe.
Exactly. And they moved on because this was hardly the only like runaway nun memoir. Really.
It's a whole genre by this point. Okay.
Yeah, whole genre. All of this kind of led Maria to try to write her own retort. So she writes this sequel, but it's kind of like the same exact thing again. And
yeah, she kind of just had the one idea.
She really did. One trick pony. And still the book sold with this retort. Everything kind of died out as it does, like with anything else. It's like it kind of ran its course. And Maria would live for about 10 more years, and she would die at the age of 33 after pickpocketing a guy she was dating while at a brothel. So that's kind of the end of her life, which is very unfortunate and sad and not in line with like who people thought Maria Monk was going to be after her like great Protestant change of heart, right?
Yeah, kind of like Norma McCorvey.
Yeah, yes. So that's a large part of the story. But now we want to get into what actually was happening behind the scenes of the creation of this memoir. Okay?
Yes, please.
Okay. Probably around the time that she was actually leaving the Magdalene Asylum, where she was being, you know, treated as a fallen woman, where I'm sure bad shit happened. Probably not baby pit bad, but, you know, not a good place to be, not a place where they're treating women well, I'm sure. But at the time, she had been spending time with this man named William K. Hoyt. And he was the head of the Canadian Benevolent Society, which was a group of Protestant missionaries and activists who hated Catholics and were very fervent about creating like propaganda against them, right? So if you'll remember that person that knocked on Mrs. Monk's door and got really upset and said, you know, Maria took our baby somewhere. Do you know where she is? Can I bribe you to say that she was in a convent? You know, all of the stuff that Mrs. Monk said. This was the man. So Maria had become Hoyt's mistress, and it's very likely that he was the real father of the baby from awful disclosures that was allegedly, you know, the result of an assault by a priest.
Do we know what happened to that baby?
We do. We do. She's okay. Well, not now.
She's haunting a lovely house in upstate New York. Yeah.
Yes, a gorgeous Victorian. But, you know, it's not certain that he was the father, but, you know, we can kind of draw the conclusion of him showing up if we are to believe Mrs. Monk and saying Maria walked out with her kid. Yeah. Right. It's kind of.
This is your own eminently believable conspiracy theory. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. After she becomes his mistress, they leave to New York. And that is, we can piece together the time where they start to create this story together about the Black nunnery. So we don't know how much of the book was like actually provided by Maria's experience in the asylum or her, you know, delusions that she had due to mental illness and maybe negative treatment that she had at the asylum. But we do know that a lot of it was provided by Hoyt during the writing process and his kind of anti-Catholic propaganda campaign that he was working on.
Okay.
Yeah. So while this process is happening, he invites some anti-Catholic nativist buddies over, Reverend Slocum, Reverend George Bourne, and Theodore Dwight. And basically, they all come together and add little bits of their own flair to this story.
Okay, so it's like Naked Came the Stranger, written by a bunch of random guys.
Yeah, or like Shakespeare, written by a bunch of random guys.
Yeah, two great literary works, Naked Came the Stranger and Shakespeare.
And the awful disclosures of Maria Monk joins the ranks. But you might say, Chelsea, how can we know that that's what happened?
Chelsea, how can we know that that's what happened?
Well, because once the book became wildly successful and super Luke, meaning super lucrative, they started... Yeah, super Luke. You like it?
I love it. Yeah.
Once it became super lucrative, they all started to sue and countersue each other, claiming to be the real author to get the profits, right?
See, just like with Misha.
Did that happen with Misha?
Well, that's the, girl raised by wolves memoir that we talked about, where there ended up being so many lawsuits that the publisher decided to investigate the validity of the book after it cost her like $11 million in damages that she had to pay. She was like, I decided I actually think that this might not be true now that it's not making me money and is in fact costing me money.
Yes, there you go. Same deal.
I love it.
Yeah, right?
See, that's the thing about actual conspiracies. At some point, a lot of people who enter into them sue each other.
Yeah.
Or at least betray each other in some way that leaves evidence behind, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And basically it was settled in the courts that Reverend Slocum wrote most of it, William Hoyt wrote some of it, Bourne, whatever his name is, George Bourne wrote some of it, and then other people offered suggestions, so everybody got like a little cut of the money, except Maria.
Of course. Yeah, of course. Classic.
Mm-hmm.
Just like with Deep Throat.
Just like, what do you mean?
Well, I guess Linda Lovelace made very little money off of that movie compared to everybody else.
Right.
Yeah,
of course.
Although,
everybody else did.
I think The Mob made the most money by far off of Deep Throat specifically. But yeah, the woman who's suffering it's about is usually the person with the least amount of profits.
Was that true, do you know, for Michelle in Michelle Remembers?
Michelle and Larry actually made out pretty well.
Because they stayed married for a long time?
Yeah. They were married until he died.
Okay.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember.
So, but that's how you get a man to not stiff you. You got to marry him. And even then.
Yeah. Well, I mean, also, here we go. Because after the book was published, Maria left Hoyt, who was just one of the contributors, and became Slocum's lover, who's the one who got the most money from the book.
He's got all the gags.
After the battle started raging about whether it was true or false, the debunkings of the debunkings, she just kind of left it all behind with some unnamed new guy, and started writing her retort, while at the same time claiming that this gaggle of evil priests had kidnapped her across state lines and were trying to send her back to Montreal. So she's still,
of course,
she's still rocking in the free world or the non-free world, I guess. And basically decades later, Maria's daughter would confirm that she had admitted to her that the whole thing was made up and complained that the men who had compelled her to write the book actually never paid her a cent, and that her mom died in this like impoverished state.
Yeah.
So do you think that this is enough evidence to say that Maria Monk did not have a tortured experience in the Black Nunnery Hotel Dieu?
Yeah, I would say it's enough evidence to say that she did not have a tortured experience there, but that she did basically everywhere else.
Yeah. And I think that's very fair to say that we don't really know how much of this was potentially an experience she had at the Magdalene Asylum.
Right.
And how much of it was completely made up by the guys.
Yeah.
How much of it was just a mental health issue of someone who had a head injury. Like we just, we'll never know the answer. And I think what's less important than the answer to that, which is often true with hoax memoirs, is the way that it was used and helped, reinforce these societal prejudices that already existed.
Yeah. And also, was used to ignore the, many of the real problems in society that existed, which are that, we don't have to worry about these like over the top, Baroque nuns, because in her actual life story, there are real nuns doing run-of-the-mill scary things, but that's not going to, become a bestseller, probably.
Exactly.
Or just, the everyday crimes committed by men against women.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're going to go now into the anti-Catholic sentiment that was happening at the time in America.
Oh, boy.
Because anti-Catholicism is basically as old as Protestantism itself, right? The Protestant Reformation comes in the 1500s.
Martin Luther sat on the toilet and Henry VIII wanted to have sex.
Right, exactly. That's a really succinct way to put it.
It all comes down to genitalia, for me.
Always. Especially for the Protestants. So they, are revolting against this Catholic hierarchy. And it was only about 100 years later when the Puritans and Pilgrims get to the land that would eventually be colonized into America, right? So at that time, there were laws against Catholics holding office. There were like special taxes Catholics had to pay. There were laws against priests owning property, and many of them were barred from voting in different colonies. All of this kind of depends on which colony. I know. I didn't know that before at all.
Yeah, no, me either.
So here's something you are just going to love, Sarah.
Oh, boy.
Have you ever heard of Pope Night?
No, I have not. What's Pope Night?
It's shocking that we have never heard. I had not heard of Pope Night either. And I think I wanted to just kind of give an example of the vibe of anti-Catholicism that was happening in America. And this was happening from the 1600s all the way to the late 1800s.
Oh,
so this is not that ancient of history. So Pope Night was like yet another, which I feel like we're always talking about on American Hysteria, yet another weird, violent parade of boys and men.
We do have a lot of those, don't we?
I know. And it was like a little bit in the style of Guy Fawkes Day, which was also on November 5th. So it was the same day. And Guy Fawkes Day, do you know much about Guy Fawkes Day? Let's watch me try and recount something I only slightly know. I think Guy Fawkes was the leader of the gunpowder plot, which was like an anti-royalist conspiracy to overthrow the monarchy.
The monarchy. There it is. The monarchy in England. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's basically it. I should know better.
I mean, the main thing I know is that the word Guy, as I learned this, comes from Guy Fawkes, because he would have, like on Guy Fawkes Night, like an effigy of Guy Fawkes that you would, what do they do with them? Do you burn them?
Yeah.
I've never been.
Burn them.
Okay, great.
You like push it around in a wheelbarrow and light it on fire. It rules.
Nice. Yeah. And so like a guy became a term for that. And that's how a guy became sort of a generic object, or just sort of a, a generic person. Yeah, I believe.
Well, that's a good description. And Pope Night, boys and men, there's no record, it said specifically, of a woman ever participating in Pope Night.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So men and boys would like dress up like devils and other monsters, and then they would carve Pope heads out of potatoes and mount them on boards. And then they'd walk around with the potato head mounted on a board, going house to house, banging on doors and demanding money, and then breaking windows when they didn't get money.
Wow.
So, does this remind you of any holiday that we love?
Yeah, Halloween, of course. Waste of a potato, but...
Yeah. So in addition to that, they created these like pretty big parade floats where they would create a full-size Pope model, like an effigy.
Wow.
Yeah. And it would be sat in a chair. And then they'd make another model of the devil that would stand behind the Pope, and it looked like it had been tarred and feathered.
Okay.
All right. And their heads were made to move with sticks like a puppet. And they also made them so that they could rise up with the sticks as they're going through town and like peer into all the second story windows.
Now, that's very creative, but that does seem a little insensitive, I would say. But imagine you're like, what if you're having like an early, an 1800s sexual experience and all of a sudden the Pope is looking in your window?
Yeah, it's scary. It could really frighten a person to death. And of course, everyone is blasted, right? They're just wasted. And so often the night would just end in a giant brawl between different Pope night processions that like ran into each other in town. And then they would like try to steal the other one's Pope, which is really fun. And then there would just be like riots. And then sometimes people would die. So yeah, that's it.
The Pope night riots. There's something interesting about humans, our struggle to have fun, because we all want to have fun, but sometimes we have too much fun and then people die and we have a big fight and we all drink too much or whatever, and it's like, boy, it's so hard to hit the right numbers, I guess, or just really when people are really angry too much of the time, then even when they try to have fun, they just end up angry again.
Yep. And that is the story of the American Parade, because it's a storied, violent history.
Yeah.
So Pope Night is still happening in the mid-1800s, but it's been going on for a long time, right? So around the time that Maria Monk's book came out in the 1830s, the influx of Irish and German Catholic immigrants was massive. So, for example, in 1832, there were about 60,000 immigrants that entered the country. And then between 1847 and 1854, there were 400,000 entering the country annually. So, it's a big change that a lot of the Protestants that made up most of the country did not like, because they had wanted to get away from the Catholics, right, and the Anglicans. So by 1860, Catholics were the largest single religious group in America, because Protestants just kept joining like smaller and smaller and more specific sects.
Right. Yeah, that is what happens when you do that. And all the potato carving in the world can't help
stop it. Yeah. And so, unsurprisingly, the narrative soon became very familiar. And it was that the Catholic Church was trying to take over the United States. And anti-immigrant nativists began creating these like very incendiary conspiratorial pieces of literature that are very like 4chan QAnon coded, right? And they're blaming immigrants for a rise in crime, a decline in American values. Samuel Morse of telegraph and Morse code fame was one of these people, unfortunately. I know. And he said that the mass immigration of Catholics was a plot by... Who do we think, Sarah? What's your best guess?
Well, I mean, the logical answer is the Pope, so I feel like I need to throw in a wild card. The King of Spain.
Good try.
Okay.
The OG Bavarian Illuminati.
Oh, all right,
ding, ding, ding.
Morse. Well, I guess you ended up bringing us Twitter, so nuts to you.
And that the Illuminati wanted to install a pope as leader of America. Blah, blah, blah. So,
whatever.
I know. Who cares? So the most famous reverend in the country at that time was Lyman Beecher, the dad of Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, the only book that beat Maria Monk's book in terms of popularity. So that's fun. What's not fun is that he was calling for mass deportations and citing the fact, and citing the fact that Catholics were taking jobs, spreading disease, causing crime. Same things we hear today, right?
It's so uncreative.
I know. And then they're also claiming that all the Catholics in America were receiving money from the Roman Catholic Church to spread their propaganda, and that they were all spies infiltrating the government at all levels. Sound familiar?
It's very familiar. Yeah. I'm hearing all kinds of echoes in my head. Yeah. Wasn't there a time when Trump misheard something or misread something and believed that actual wild dog coyotes were being sent over across the border?
I'm fucking sure that that happened. Yeah. They're bringing coyotes. They're eating the pets. Some other popular texts that were written at the time, to me, sound very like, you know, those specials on History Channel that's like Secret Societies Unlocked, and it's just like a bunch of horse shit. Yeah. Or like Dan Brown kind of, what was that book called?
Something, the Da Vinci Code was the big one.
The Da Vinci Code. Yeah. So here are some of the titles. Master Key to Popery, Mysteries of Popery Unveiled, Priestcraft Exposed, Danger in the Dark, A Tale of Intrigue and Priestcraft.
That is a lot more 90s cable special than I would have expected.
I know. Then there was The Female Jesuit or a Spy in the Family.
Oh my. Oh, not a female Jesuit.
And then my favorite, Jesuit Juggling, 40 popish frauds detected and disclosed.
No! Is it really about juggling at all?
I don't know. I don't have a copy, sadly.
Yeah.
It may be lost to time.
You haven't read Jesuit Juggling?
You haven't lived.
I'll let it slide. Yeah, seriously.
So, because of all of this propaganda, mobs did start burning down Catholic churches and attacking immigrants at random, and then just feeling super justified because they had this like backbone of propaganda coursing through the country, right? So even if they were questioning it, it wouldn't be in their best interest to question it. We all know how this goes. It's exactly the same thing that we are seeing today, right?
Right. I mean, it feels like a very basic triangle where in order to keep the people whose economic situation you're destroying from noticing what's going on or getting mad at you, you make sure that they fight with somebody even more vulnerable, and then they won't come for you, ideally.
Exactly. Great way to put it. So this brings us back to nuns, all right? Alrighty. And the Runaway Nun memoir. So now that we kind of have the groundwork of anti-Catholicism, we'll get back a little bit to nuns here.
The great American genre, the Runaway Nun memoir.
And it is like, there are like books, academic books written about like the Runaway Nun narrative. So it's important too, because in addition to hating Catholics, we also hated women that made choices that were not to be mothers and wives. And so the nun was kind of like this really interesting combination of like victim and perpetrator, because somehow like everybody believed that like they were somehow doing it against their will, but then they're also the villains of these stories, like these decrepit old women that like are barren and sad and cruel. And, you know, so it's like this interesting character that contains definitely multitudes.
Yeah, it's a very interesting sort of victim-villain hybrid that they've created.
It is. And yeah, so a lot of the stories were like, these women would never choose this, so they're being held against their will, especially those that were Protestant and then became Catholic, right? That was like the ultimate betrayal. So let's meet now the predecessor to Maria Monk, okay? Her name is Rebecca Reed. She was a Protestant girl from a working class farming family who came to this Catholic school on a full scholarship and converted to Catholicism, much against the desire of her father. She ran away from home and joined this place called the Ursuline Convent, and that was in Boston. So this wasn't in Canada. This was in America. And she did this all against her family's will. She started the process to become a nun and stayed at this convent for, you know, a few months, and then was like, this fucking sucks. And she didn't want to do chores anymore. She didn't want to study the Catholic texts. She didn't want to give up the secular world either. She wanted to just go back home.
Like many young girls, she liked the idea of being a nun, but in execution, it kind of sucked.
Yeah, exactly. But she was sort of known as like a little bit of a paranoid girl. So one day she overheard this conversation between the bishop of this convent and the mother superior. And they were talking about like, hey, she's not doing well here. She's acting out. Like, instead of kicking her out, because I think they were like trying to keep people in the church, right? They didn't want to keep kicking people out of it. So they were like, maybe we can send her to this other convent with this other mother superior, and maybe she'll vibe better there. And we don't have to like lose her from the faith. But she overhears this and decides, oh shit, they're going to human traffic me to Canada. So she decides to make a daring escape, and she just like runs and kicks down some lattices in the outer garden and like runs to the safety of a neighbor's house. But the fact is that like she could have left at any time and nobody was keeping her there. And her escape was like so ridiculous that there's stories of the nuns like stopping the classes and looking out the window as she's running away and just being like, okay.
Well, it's nice of her to inject an action sequence into the whole thing, you know?
Yeah, you got to have one, right? So she came, started telling this story around the town. She was basically saying what she thought had happened, or, you know, we just don't know what her intentions were. We don't know if she really thought this or if she wanted to get something out of this. We don't really know what her intentions were, but she started telling people that they were going to human traffic her. And this other runaway nun at the same time in town, she goes by Sister Mary. Her real name was Elizabeth Harrison, and she had escaped the convent as well. After she felt that the demands were too much, she thought it sucked. But then eventually she returned because the Mother Superior was like, hey, you can have a period of rest to recover before you go back into like the difficulties of taking the veil and becoming a nun. So she went back on her own accord. But then the rumors started like, what happened to Elizabeth Harrison? She's gone. She must be being held prisoner at the Ursuline convent. And they thought, okay, she's probably being tortured in these dungeons and we have to do something about it. So all of these anti-Catholic locals started to spread pamphlets all over town that Sister Mary was being held captive and that they basically needed to storm the convent. Sound familiar?
It's reminding me of Comet Ping Pong, actually.
Yeah, it's very Pizzagate. It's true.
Yeah.
That's what it reminded me of as well. So around this time, like, things are getting whipped up, like, on this particular day. And, like, crowds are kind of gathering and a storm seems to be coming. The same day, this government group was allowed to go inside the convent because all these rumors were spreading. So, you know, actual officers went there to make sure that there was no one being held against her will. They go in. The nuns are like, fine. They talk to Sister Mary. Sister Mary's like, I'm fine. I'm just chilling. And that's it, right? So they're like, okay, this was just rumors and we can put this baby to bed. But in a Shakespearean turn, word of her safety did not get to this gathering mob in time.
Oh, God. Okay. I don't like this.
Or they didn't care, you know? I don't know.
Yeah. Or they just figure it's, you know, it's a lie. Because
we're already here. Yeah. We came all the way over here.
Look, we're all ready for some mob action. We can't stop now. This is my Saturday.
Exactly. Yeah. You can't disappoint men who were all drinking by this point also. So regardless of her safety, the mob is gathering. It's surrounding the convent. They're chanting, no popery, down with the cross. They're getting drunker and drunker. They start pounding on the doors and demanding to come inside and free the imprisoned nun.
Oh, God.
But then the Mother Superior is just like, starts screaming at them and calling them drunkards and threatening them. And then one of them tries to shoot her.
Yeah, don't fuck with nuns.
No, not a Mother Superior especially. And yeah, so one of them then takes a shot at her with a pistol and then behind, and it misses, luckily, but then from behind that man comes 100 men wearing mock like indigenous brave paint, which is like so embarrassing. of these like Protestant white men to run in. Like it's just really all so embarrassing.
Yeah, men throughout history are both scary and embarrassing. It's not even a new thing.
No, it's always that way. Yeah. It's always that way. Scary and embarrassing.
And about equal measure.
I'd say it's about 50-50. So then they all storm inside and they set the convent on fire.
Man.
And while they're doing this, they're doing more embarrassing things. They're dressing up in the nun frocks, like as the building burns. They're burning their Catholic books. They drop a piano out the second-story window. Okay? Next, as it's burning, all the nuns escape. The nuns are okay. But then this mob, apparently, according to my sources, goes out into the garden where the cemetery is and starts digging up the bones of nuns to put on a skeleton puppet show with the nun skeletons.
No, Chelsea, no. And you and I love skeleton puppet shows, but only plastic ones.
I know. It's one of your favorite things.
It's giving a bad name to skeleton puppet enthusiasts. Yeah,
I know.
It's really true. Oh, it's interesting how being against imaginary Catholic tyranny allows you to menace actual human women and also dead ones in quite an impressive twist.
I know. It is that thing of like, careful fighting monsters, lest G become one, because this is like...
Yeah, I know. This is exactly what that Nietzsche guy was talking about.
And unless this is also like an exaggerated story from the other side. I don't know. But I read about this skeleton stuff. Like, I believe it too.
But I believe that. I believe that drunk guys would do that. You do wonder about how much effort it takes to dig, a hole. But it's the olden times before we had so much grave digging equipment, and there was a lot of guys. So why not?
It's true. So after this like massive event happens and the convent burns down, Rebecca Reed writes her own book called 6 Months in a Convent in 1835, just 1 year before Maria Monk writes The Awful Disclosures.
Oh, boy.
And in that book, she claims that she had to perform all these frightening penances. She saw a bunch of other nuns being held prisoner. She had like special knowledge that the Pope was trying to gain power in the United States. And she was talking about the convent like it was a human trafficking ring, basically. So same old. History rhymes, right?
Yeah. Sometimes it rhymes like those pop songs where they just rhyme a word with the same word. And you're like, well, all right. I guess you didn't want to stay past 5. That's fine.
Oh, yeah. No, that's great. It's so true. I put that on a friggin' bumper sticker. Our Sarah Marshall, you're just a bumper sticker machine. I'll tell you what.
Just like Forrest Gump.
Just like Forrest Gump. More after this. And now, back to the show. So we don't know why Rebecca did it. We know that it's not true. So you'll remember Rebecca Reed is not the nun that like went back and was there willingly. She was the one that...
found life there too restrictive.
Right.
Yeah.
And then left and kind of like spread some rumors after she kicked down the lattices and everyone watched and was like, what is she doing?
That's right. The lattice kicker.
So we don't know why she wrote the book. Maybe she wanted a bunch of money. Maybe she wanted attention. Maybe she had, mental health issues at the time. Maybe all of them all at once.
Maybe living in an unbelievably restrictive society makes women act crazy more often, kind of justifiably so.
Yes. And you and I are seeming to always be talking about this very thing.
See also Tarantism, see also the Enfield Poltergeist, see also almost every episode I've been on, aside from Chicken Soup for the Soul. That one is middle-aged men making a mess, which is another fun topic.
It is. It always is. Which I guess a lot of the story is too, but
yeah,
it's got it all.
It's a hybrid.
It's got everything.
It does.
So with all the outrage from these runaway nun tales, like Rebecca's, like Maria's, and several other books that had been written, really with similar themes and similar debunkings, and it was a fad at the time.
Yeah. A nice wave in publishing for everybody to make some money off of until the public got tired of it and moved on to whatever the next weird lie was.
Which is like exactly like the Satanic Panic, too.
Exactly.
But it had like very real world implications where state legislators and local governments were passing convent inspection laws so that at any point. Yeah, I know. So that at any point they could go in.
I mean, I don't know. Not the worst idea, but this isn't really a great reason to do it.
Exactly. There are many other reasons, but they just were able to gain entry into buildings whenever they wanted to try to find these imprisoned nuns, but they never found any.
Yeah. Buildings where women lived. Ideal.
Yeah, right? Then just a handful of years after Maria's book was published, Baltimore rioted for 3 days and almost destroyed another convent. A few years later, these huge mobs in Philadelphia burned down blocks of Catholic homes and 2 churches, killing 13 people.
Jesus Christ.
I know. And there were riots in Louisville that saw 30 people killed over the course of 2 years. So we just kind of don't bring up or remember the violence that was happening against like Irish and German Catholic immigrants. But it was like extremely violent, extremely venomous, extremely propagandized to the point of parody, right? It's just like there's all of the things that we know today happening.
Which goes to show that sort of like racism and xenophobia whipped up by anxieties about immigration and, you know, and also religious intolerance seems too weak a word when we're digging up skeletons and stuff. But, you know, that like it's so clearly never about the thing it's claiming to be about, because throughout history, it doesn't matter who the mob is scared of. The mob just wants to be scared of something.
Right. And they want an excuse to act violently. And because, you know, everybody at this point, it's not like the people who are attacking these folks aren't also suffering, right? It's like there's all this suffering happening. There's all this poverty happening. A lot of these people are Protestants who work on farms or who are, you know, in working class jobs, and they're angry because they're being told that Catholics are the reason that they are down on their luck, right? It's the same exact thing. So they want to go out and try to battle this phantom.
Yeah, it feels better to attack than to feel like you're being attacked.
Yeah.
Or to assess the ways that you are being attacked by the actual, you know, ruling class.
Yeah.
Classic mob dynamics, really.
It really is. It really is. So in 1893, this is 60 years after Maria's book was published, like we're still in just anti-Catholic hysteria territory. And a nativist creates and circulates this fake letter from Pope Leo how many ones are there? I mean, how many eyes are there? Pope Leo the 13th.
Oh boy.
And
yeah, that's just an unsafe use of Roman numerals.
It is. So a nativist creates and circulates this fake letter, so like another hoax letter from Pope Leo the 13th that is demanding all Catholics in America to exterminate all heretics. And it was like widely believed by Protestant anti-Catholics. It's kind of like the protocols of the Elders of Zion, right?
Yeah, I was just trying to remember. Yeah, exactly. And again, it's like, look, if you want to be a racist mob, then like surely you should just be secure enough in the awful things that you're doing that you don't need a story about how actually you're behaving defensively. But again, it's like this is what people require. You need some kind of fake document proving that this is actually a proportionate response you're undertaking as you're torching buildings and so on.
Absolutely. So it's likely that The Awful Disclosures of Maria Monk was the most influential book of nativist propaganda to exist before the Civil War. Like, it's obviously, I mean, it has to be, right? Because it was the second most popular book.
Yeah.
So
just by sheer numbers.
Yeah. And not only did it like provide fodder for anti-Catholic hysteria and for people that had, you know, a vested interest in bringing down the Catholics or whatever you want to say, but it also reinforced gender roles in Protestantism, basically saying that nuns are these victims that we need to save so that they can conform to the idea of good womanhood that we have in our Protestant faith, mothers, wives, etc. Right? So it kind of served this dual purpose.
And of course, the only truly good religion for women is the Wicker Man religion, where you get to get pregnant by jumping over a fire.
Exactly. I would be in that religion. So the last thing I wanted to point out that I think is interesting is, are you familiar with the essay, The Paranoid Style in American Politics by Richard Hofstadter?
No. Well, the title is a little familiar, but no, I have no idea. Tell me everything.
I'm sure you've come across it at times, but it's considered maybe the seminal text on American conspiracy theories and how they operate in the ways that we've talked about.
Yeah, I bet I've heard about it from you is why it sounds familiar.
Yeah. It's just like a really popular sociology paper that helps to explain the mechanisms of conspiracy theories and the thinking of conspiracy theorists when they're coming up with these narratives. So in that essay, he actually uses the awful disclosures as a prime example of conspiracy theorist propaganda, which I think is probably the first place I heard about this memoir, years ago.
Nice.
And he talks about what I think is really interesting. He says, quote, that there's a special significance attached to the figure of the renegade. So the renegade being the person who is involved in the dark, shadowy forces, who leaves those dark, shadowy forces to kind of come to the light and illuminate this dark place that people believed existed, but they didn't yet have proof. So the renegade character really does a lot there. I'm thinking Mike Warnke.
Exactly. Yeah. And someone who's able to craft a story based on what people kind of already think, but need someone to confirm, and sort of making yourself that person who can testify. Yeah.
Yeah. They're just like someone who can confirm all of your paranoid conspiratorial suspicions.
Yeah. Like any good coast to coast caller.
Exactly. So yeah, this is the story of the renegade who proved to the public what they wanted to hear and justified a nativist hatred that they already had for Catholics, and basically told them all that they needed to hear.
And didn't even get paid.
Didn't even get paid. Somebody got paid. A handful of men got paid.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, what do you think about this story now that we're at the end? This complicated, long saga.
Yeah.
What do you think about it?
I loved it. I feel like it's so compelling to me how this exact story has played out so many times that you and I have talked about, and that this could happen basically the same way today, where you have conservatives who, like to plant fake news stories by, for example, trying to get women to claim that they were sexually assaulted by prominent Democrats. That was a thing for a while,
Yeah. Yep.
And that any cause that's using you to drum up support for the belief system that they're trying to advertise will jettison you very quickly as soon as you stop being useful to them, or even when you are being useful to them, because you're not really meaningful to them as a person. You're just, somebody that they're instrumentalizing. And the fact that, looking at the trauma that historically women have had to bear throughout American history and the lack of recognition for that, there is a sort of sick math to the way this all lines up, where you have been through something and you would like to perhaps be able to generate some degree of outrage for that, or get some kind of attention for the kind of experience that you need attention and help for. But the only way to do it is to play into the hands of, a movement whose real goal is burning down convents or prosecuting lesbians or whatever else.
Right.
Well, Chelsea, thank you for taking me on this beautiful toboggan ride down a mountain of garbage, where we have learned so much about America, and also that hoaxes are more similar than they would appear from a distance. And there's something comforting about that, because it might make them a little bit easier to spot.
Yeah, I think keep your eyes peeled, people. They're everywhere. This was American Hysteria. Make sure you listen to Sarah's shows, You're Wrong About and You Are Good, wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to support our show and make sure that we can continue making it and get ad-free episodes and bonus content, you can go to patreon.com/American Hysteria or subscribe on Apple Plus. You'll get access to Hysteria Home Companion, another podcast that I do with our producer Miranda, where we tell you stories related to the topics that we're covering, or just the kind of wild stories we know that you'll love. That's patreon.com/American Hysteria or subscribe on Apple Plus. It is the best way to support our show. Another great way to support our show is to leave us a 5-star review on whatever app you're using. You can do it right now. It only takes a second, and we will love you forever. You can also go to AmericanHysteria.com to pick up some of our merch or to leave us a message on the Urban Legends hotline about a tale that you remember from growing up or even one you've heard recently, and we might do an entire investigation about it. That's AmericanHysteria.com. American Hysteria's producer and editor is Miranda Zickler. Our associate producer is Riley Swedelius Smith, and I'm your host, Chelsea Weber Smith. Thanks, as always, for listening, and I hope, despite it all, that you have a great week.